Understanding our own experiences, I believe, is a key foundation for leaving an inner struggle like insomnia. And today, I'm extremely excited to share with you a brand new model that explains not only why we have so much wakefulness when we struggle with sleep, why we have all the other difficult experiences as part of the insomnia struggle, and every other version of the inner struggle as well. I call it the universal model, and I'm so pleased to share it with you today. Hi there, and welcome to this special episode in which I will present a brand new model that I believe can be incredibly helpful when we struggle with insomnia or any other version of the inner struggle as well. And this is the product of 7 years of thinking, pondering, engaging with community members, having interviews, talking with other coaches, with other people in the space. And it's really, in a way, a summary of all that I wanted to talk about in that book, that one, Principles of NATO. In fact, it's ironic because as soon, like 2 weeks after I had actually published this, this model came to me. I was like, wow, this is such a nice way to visualize the key elements of that book, Principles of NATO. So really, really excited to share this with you. And sometimes I feel like, Daniel, this is why you're here. Like your mission in life, the purpose of you being on this planet, apart, of course, from the most important things, which is family. But other than that, the purpose is to share this model with the world. Sometimes I feel that way. And now, with that said, I'm going to use an iPad today to draw this out for you. And my handwriting is not great. And this model may look a little bit underwhelming with like the visual presentation that I'm using, but I hope you will see how simple it is and how valuable that simplicity is and how widely applicable it is. And so I hope to be able to share that with you. Now, the only knowledge or terminology we want to be familiar with before we look at the model is actually the concept of tokenization. So tokenization just means that when we have started to interpret or think of an experience or object as a threat, and the token here is that experience or the object or experience that we think of as a threat is the token. Now, to add a little bit more context here, if we, for example, start to think of spiders as really threatening, then we will experience fear when we see a spider, and we will want to avoid it and escape it. And the more we escape it, the more we kind of signal to ourselves that they are a threat. And this can become quite a big part of our lives. We may not even leave the house because we're afraid of spiders. We call this arachnophobia, right? And here, what has become tokenized is spiders, and the token is a spider, right? So just sharing this to kind of give you a grasp of the idea of tokenization and what the token is. Now, for those of you who have read Principles of NATO, there is an update to that framework, which is simply the following. In Principles of NATO, I talk a lot about how a token is something that is inherently harmless that we have started to think of as a threat. Now, there was like a logical problem I struggled with a lot, after writing the book, which is the kind of like, what is a real threat? What is, an actual physical, tangible threat to our health? Like sometimes there's a little gray area there. So I found that it actually is more helpful to think of tokenization as simply like anything that we have started to think of a threat, regardless of whether it truly represents a threat to us or not. Like whatever we think of as a threat is the token. Okay. So with that in mind, it is now time for me to illustrate, how to use the universal model and what it is all about. And to do that, I'm going to draw. Let's pull up my drawing board and let's get started. All right, so we're going to start in a situation where nothing in particular is happening. We're just going about our lives when we encounter something that is stressful. So I'm just going to write stress here. And the stress can be anything from, we're going to move, we have an exam, we have a problem with our boiler in our house, or our car has some issue, whatever it is. You think of anything that you think of as somewhat threatening, something that you're worried about, that is a stress, and that puts our mind in what we will call the threatened state. Okay, so the threatened state is simply a state where our mind is thinking of something as a threat. Something's on the horizon, something needs to deal with, problem solve. There's a threat, or at least we think there's a threat, and our mind is in the threatened state. Now, what are some things that you think we can experience when our mind is in the threatened state? And feel free to pause here and write down some things on your end. But basically, this is a question for you, and I'll answer it together with you, of course. But we need to think about, like, what are some things that we can experience when our mind is in the threatened state? And certainly, we will have thoughts. Okay? And we can say, for example, we will have what if thoughts, and we can have like should I thoughts. And these are thoughts like, what if this happens next? What if this happens? Or thoughts like, maybe I should do this, maybe I should do that, right? It's like kind of problem solving type thoughts, like warning thoughts, like things that keep us, in a mind space where we're ready to address what we think of as a threat, right? So we have thoughts, okay? What we'll also experience as part of the threatened state, of course, are emotions, okay? Emotions. Now, if I'd ask you what do you think is the main emotion we experience in threatened state, you'd probably say fear. And fear is like one of it's a very practical emotion to fear to have in our mind, because it prepares us to fight or to escape. So definitely fear is there. But if we think of a scenario like you're in line for something and somebody cuts in front of you, in the line, that's kind of a threat because you might not get what you want. How do you respond in that situation? Well, probably in this threatened state, in this version of like the threatened state, we will respond with anger, right? So we become upset, angry. And how about a situation where your best friend tells you they're going to move to a different city, state, somewhere, they're going to move very far away, and you're hardly going to see them, and there's nothing you can do about it? This is also a threat for us because we're missing somebody that we feel is like there for in some sense for a safety, right? Friendship, community is about safety. So if somebody's leaving, that's a threat to us, but there's nothing we can do about it. And in that situation, we respond often with sadness. So you can see that not only fear is not the only emotion that we'll feel in a threatened state, but it depends on the context of the threatened state. There are a variety of emotions that can arise from the threatened state. Now, you may very well, when I said, what do you think we can experience in the threatened state? You may very well have thought about somatic experiences, So we'll just put somatic here and an arrow. And these are things like palpitations, breathing fast, vigilance, being awake, being more alert, maybe peeing a lot, maybe having like bowel movement changes, like loose stools and things of that nature, that we can experience that in the threatened state as well. And in the threatened state, we'll in high likelihood also experience behavior changes, and these are specifically changes that are related to how we attempt to get out of the threatened state, to escape the threatened state, to no longer be in the threatened state. So some type of action with that in mind. Okay. Now, let's pause here for a second and think about, like, again, we have some type of stress in our life. Let's say we are going to move to a different place, and our mind goes and we have these kind of warning thoughts like, okay, what if we don't find a place to live there? What if the trailer doesn't arrive in time? What if this? And we feel a bit anxious about this, and we may very well have some palpitations and things of that nature. And our actions become maybe like we call an extra time to make sure of this and that, right? Is this something we would, I was saying, is this something we would think of as, let's call it normal or not normal, practical or not practical, typical or not typical? Well, in fact, we would think of this as typical. Something big is happening. We're thinking about it. We're a little bit anxious. We're having some body sensations, etc., etc. All this is actually typical. That so far, everything I've described here is just part of the normal, human experience. But now we come to like what I think is like the key point of this new model. The key thing with this model is the next step. Let's look at this threatened state, and let's look at all the experiences that are produced from the threatened state and ask ourselves this question. What happens if at this point our mind makes the mistake of identifying a product of the threatened state as a threat? What if our mind identifies a product of the threatened state as a threat? Let's imagine that our brain identifies vigilance as a threat. We're going to mark that here, vigilance, with a T, which indicates that wakefulness or vigilance here has been tokenized. What is actually a typical response is now thought of as a threat. And let's look at what happens next. When we now find ourselves vigilant, awake at night, for example, we think this shouldn't be happening. This is not good. This is a threat. What happens now is that vigilance or wakefulness leads to an amplification of the threatened state, because we're encountering the thing we think is of as a threat, and that elevates that's our sense of danger. It amplifies the threatened state, which leads now to what? That's right, more vigilance, more wakefulness. And what we're now describing using this universal model is insomnia. Insomnia occurs when wakefulness has become tokenized, and it leads to this loop where we're more awake, the more threatened our brain thinks we is, and the more threatened our brain thinks we is, the more awake we become, and the more awake we are, the more threatened the brain is, etc., etc. This is the loop that we experience in insomnia, the wakefulness loop, if you will. But being awake at night is certainly not the only thing we experience when we have insomnia. No, we have what if thoughts. What if this happens? What if I can't sleep tomorrow? What if this is the rest of my life? What is this? And here we see that these are expected. When our mind is in this threatened state, we will have these type of warning thoughts, right? We will also be anxious. We will have emotions that are part of the threatened state. And all of this threatened state is driven by this loop of like wakefulness leading to the threatened state, which leads to wakefulness, etc., etc. In the threatened state, wakefulness is not the only thing we experience. We have these what if thoughts. We may feel scared and anxious, or we may feel angry, depending on how we think of this threat. Or we may be feeling sad, and we will have these somatic experience as well. The palpitations, the breathing fast, peeing a lot, etc., etc. These all come from the threatened state that in this case with insomnia are driven by this loop of wakefulness feeding the threatened state, right? So what we've seen now so far is, how we can see insomnia in the threatened state and in the wakefulness loop, but also all the experiences that come with insomnia as well. But that's not all. We're now going to use this model to get a sense of how we can also explain all other versions of the inner struggle. As you've seen, I've removed this like tokenization T next to vigilance here, but feel free here to pause and imagine what will happen if we tokenize any other of these products of the threatened state. Now, I'm just going to pick palpitations because that one is pretty obvious. What happens if palpitations are tokenized, not wakefulness, but in the threatened state where we have palpitations? Those become what we think of as like, this shouldn't be happening. Why is this happening? Is something wrong with my heart? When palpitations are tokenized, that leads to another loop, which is that whenever we have a fast heartbeat, that leads us to that amplification of the threatened state, which leads to more palpitations, which leads to a higher sense of threat and more palpitations. And now we have a palpitation loop, but it's part of being in the threatened state. Of course, we will also have the what if thoughts, the worry, anxiety, the sadness, the other physical experiences of the threatened state. But this time, the motor, what's driving it, is this like palpitation cycle instead. Now, let's imagine we pick another one. Let's imagine we pick bowel movements, like changes in our bowel movements, which we can have as part of the threatened state. Now you can see this will be a loop where we have, let's say, loose stools, which we often have when we're stressed. But now we think they represent danger, and we're like, why is this happening? And the threatened state is amplified, and we have more changes in our bowel movements, and this becomes, something like what we call IBS, or irritable bowel syndrome, right? Explained by this simple model. What if we picked something like, fear or anxiety as being tokenized, right? Now this leads to a loop where when we feel anxious, that amplifies our threatened state because we think we shouldn't be anxious. And in the threatened state, we have more anxiety, and this becomes like the driver of the inner struggle. But of course, within that inner struggle, we can have all the other experiences as well, like peeing a lot, being awake. All of the motor is this kind of like tokenization of anxiety. Now, I'm going to pause there. There's much, much more to explore, but I hope this gives you a sense of how simple, like this inner struggle really can be, how it can be explained in such a simple way that is very, very different from how, let's say, depression, OCD, insomnia, et cetera, are explained, in kind of like the mainstream framework. Now, I think if you look at all the kind of individual components of what I've expressed here, you'll say, like, there's nothing really new here. Like, all these things have been said before. Yes, but I think this model, I haven't come across it anywhere else, and I think it's so simple and really, really, really helpful. So what we've seen here is that in this particular episode, we've seen that this universal model explains, the wakefulness cycle of insomnia. It explains how we have all the other experiences of insomnia, the thoughts, the physical, experiences, the emotions. And we didn't talk about this so much, but the safety behaviors as well, like the sleep efforts. And it also explains how all the other versions of this like same inner struggle come to be. And final thing I want to say here is that I think there's so much more to be explored around this model, and many of the other thoughts I have talked about in Principles of NATO. And I've been thinking about this for a very long time. And then I got an email from somebody named Tamara who said, "Hey, Daniel, I never read a book twice, and I read Principles of NATO twice. Are you going to explore this further somewhere, in some shape or form?" And I decided I will. At some point soon, I'm going to start a second YouTube channel where we really, really like focus on this universal model, see what it applies, very, very broadly, and also like see where that takes us. Like, hopefully, some of you will be joining me for that journey, asking questions and see how we can improve on this model and hopefully create a framework that can be really, really helpful for humanity. But as far as the Sleep Coach School goes and this channel, nothing's going to change. It all started with insomnia for me, and sleep has a special place in my heart. I will always be teaching on sleep and insomnia, right? But I also feel like really drawn to explore this model and some thoughts around it further. So I'll conclude here. Sorry again, like the presentation material isn't awesome. I know I'm not a great drawer, but I hope it made sense to you. And let me know in the comment sections what you thought. And look forward to seeing you real soon again. Bye for now. Hi, it's me, Daniel. And I hope you really found a lot of value in the video you just saw. Now I have a question for you. Did you hit the like button? Did you leave a comment? If not, then please consider that, because that is what leads to people finding us, finding peaceful sleep and peace of mind and feeling like themselves again, and all the other wonderful things that come from understanding what insomnia is really all about. So yes, just hit that like button, leave a comment, and that will help so much. Thank you.